You are listening to 93.9 Dublin South FM.
Broadcasting from the Dundrum Town Centre, this is Dublin South FM.
Thank you and good afternoon. It was a long night yesterday following the US presidential elections. Hope you too were busy crunching the numbers or trying to figure out how the world would change as a consequence of this election. Was it a surprise to you? For me, Trump is back and new world order awaits us all. But before I take you there, let me share something interesting with you. You might have noticed that just like in India, the exit polls in US, they too have failed once again. And as usual, the media has taken quite a credibility shock. And while we are on this, let's not forget the US is actually the birthplace of what many call Godi media in India. We Indians, like students in a classroom, young ones, are picking up the bad traits from the big boy US much faster than the good habits that we can take from them. Therefore, with many Indian state elections coming up, the exit polls will soon start rolling out and they would be influencing the market, the news, the narrative. But then here's the thing. It's always wise not to believe them outrightly. That's a primary lesson we Indians must take from this US presidential election for now. Back to US, President Donald Trump is president again. It's a history in making. Only twice it has happened in 250 years of American history. And he claims the White House amongst a highly polarized global landscape. His bold and unconventional foreign policy approaches now will face new and pressing challenges. Here I am talking about the two wars that are going on, which are impacting the global peace and stability. With reference to equation with China and other diplomatic wars, Cold Wars, that's happening around the world with US, we will discuss some other day. With tensions simmering across East Europe and the Middle East, now Trump's assertive stances on NATO, Ukraine and Israel are set to redefine America's role in the world stage. That is what we are going to discuss here and see what surprises holds for us. Now, from promising a swift end to the Ukraine conflict through direct negotiation with Russia, but then giving a firm support to Israel in this escalating Gaza crisis, Trump's actions will signal a shift from a multilateral kind of diplomacy, which is everybody involved. It will shift to a transactional diplomacy, which means America's first strategy, and that is going to test the traditional US-Israeli alliance and what effect it has on the stability of the world. We are already talking about the Third World War. So this is the kind of global order which is facing a humongous strain. But over the years, America's leverage to mediate and broker or enforce peace across the world has undeniably diminished, pressured by shifting policies in its own politics. And now that the world is increasingly nodal, that is, like it is divided into, say, something like local gully bosses. So we got China, India, Japan and Korea in its own right, Europe, France in its own right, South Africa now flexing its muscles, Brazil. So there are nodes across the world. Turkey has its own power. So does Iran. So in this nodal world, how will America enforce peace in its own diminishing diplomatic power? Take, for example, the evolution of today's conflicts. They have become resistant to resolution. If you observe, nobody is listening to nobody. This stubbornness reflects a web of interlocking regional and global competitions where superpowers, conventional superpowers like US, is losing influence. And they are met with bold local gully boys like India, who has its own stance on Israel-Gaza conflict as well as for the Russia-Ukraine war. North Korea sending troops to Russia, and they are all asserting their interest. Often they are in opposite directions. Consider Ukraine. Russia's invasion has not only drawn Western support for Kiev, but then it has also heightened the East European defense. But then look at what US has done for Sudan. For that matter, any country. It's not even in the news. It's not even there in the global G7, G20 narrative. What I'm trying to say here is that these are examples of conflict dynamics and the host of regional stakeholders with their competing interests that is overtaking the humanitarian concerns. And the role that US or for that matter Europe or NATO they are playing they are vastly in contrast. All this is because now the world is seeing an erosion of American moral high ground. And this is a very, very important factor which is playing part in the global diplomacy and the dynamics of these wars. Historically, US has projected itself with an image as a principled defender of democracy and human rights. However, this image has become increasingly fractured. If you see the election surveys, ironically, the state of democracy in the United States was the single largest issue among the voters. About 35% expressed that upholding democracy is the topmost priority for the Americans in this election. Hence, I would say America has to walk the talk and clean its backyard first. A prominent issue lies with the perceived double standard. The US firm condemnation of Russia's aggression in Ukraine sharply contrasts with its stance on Israel's action in Gaza. This inconsistency does not go unnoticed, and you can track these differences closely, particularly as atrocities continues elsewhere, as in Sudan, Yemen, Lebanon now. But then, these crises are less of a priority for Washington. Therefore, looking ahead to the 2024 election where Trump has come back to power, this election is going to steer US foreign policy profoundly. Trump's approach seems to be both brash and distinctly personal, if you notice. He calls himself as a peacemaker, and he hints that Washington's commitment to international cooperation may not continue. It is going to be more of a transactional. His strong support for Israel's security policy underscores his message to Netanyahu, do what you have to do. Now that could signal an even more permissive US stance towards Israel's action in the region. Additionally, he wants to expand the Abraham Accord that actually prevents the Palestinians' concerns being raised appropriately. Inadvertently, it will deepen the problems in the Middle Eastern crisis. In context to the Israel-Gaza conflict, Trump's position is also not clear. So there are contradictions. While he wants to resolve the Gaza crisis, his earlier decision during his first presidency to move US embassy to Jerusalem, this was a symbolic endorsement of Israel's claim to the city, which was in contradiction to what the Palestinians want. And Palestinians see East Jerusalem as the capital of Palestinian state. So there has been shifts. Not going deeper into the issues of West Bank, where Trump has stopped labeling Israeli settlements as illegal, and in a way it is endorsing Israelis' expansionism. So there are contradictions in the foreign policy, and that is not just limited to Middle East and Ukraine, but it also extends to NATO. His preferences for deal making over Ukraine war, he insists that he can swiftly negotiate with Russia, claiming that he would be able to de-escalate the conflict by one, talking to Putin, and second, by reducing US involvement. Now, such ambiguities opens up lots of questions, but then he is the only president who has met Putin face to face, and he has met the North Korean president Kim Jong-un. So if he says he will be able to de-escalate the conflicts on the other side of the world, there is a point there, but not with the Gaza crisis. His foreign policy is also going to affect the power and the position of NATO, because he wants to bring it to a business-like transactional foreign policy. And he is not looking for a multilateral cooperation, but wants to be paid for the role of American defense resources. So, all taken together, Trump's stance is going to be a very complex one. While he wants to have a reconciliation in Ukraine or with North Korea, there is going to be confrontation in the Middle East, both with Iran and with the Palestinian state. Therefore, as a great power, its role with multi-nodal powers, localized powers in the regions, it is going to be very challenging to counterbalance all the tensions. Now, whether Trump's administration would stabilize or fuel these conflicts, time will tell. But one thing is clear, he has to play a role of peacemaker as well as a pacifist. Role of peacemaker is necessary in current situation, though it is going to be complex and consequential. The stakes are high. How it goes about, we will continue to talk about it, discuss about it, and debate about it. That was one aspect of the Trump's administration. See you again next week. Thanks for your feedback. Bye for now.
Everything's fine on 93.9 Dublin South FM.